And we're back with more political analysis. Peggy Noonan is a columnist for the Wall Street Journal and a CBS News contributor. David Axelrod is a senior political commentator for CNN. Jamelle Bouie covers politics for Slate and is also a CBS News political analyst. Ruth Marcus is a columnist for the Washington Post. And Ben Domenech is the editor of the Federalist. Peggy, is Donald Trump unstoppable?
Well, we're going to find out. The indices are all in his direction, aren't they? I'm interested in that his power, if that is the word, is such that he has actually been able to be, in a way, a one-man wrecking crew in the area of deportment and how one proceeds politically on the stump. Mr. Rubio is attempting, as you know, to give Trump a fight in Trump's own style. I'm not sure how that works, but certainly the indices are good.
Yeah, the 11th commandment is shredded to confetti. Thou shalt not attack a Republican. Jamelle, what do you think? And the Rubio, as Peggy said, Rubio is trying Trump's tactics, putting him back on him. Is that effective?
I think it might have been effective had he been doing it 6 months ago. Had the entire Republican field 6 months ago been really hitting Trump on this point that Trump seems to really only be in this for himself. As it stands at this stage, not only do I not think it's effective, I think it actually might be counterproductive, because what it sounds like Rubio is doing is saying to people that he needs support from, that you were fooled and you were conned, now come vote for me. Right. And I don't think that works.
Yeah. I agree with that, and I think there's another way in which it can be less than effective. You asked Rubio if it was too little, too late. I think there's a little bit of too much, too late, which is he is just getting down in the muck with Trump, and when you get down in the muck, you get up with muck on you. So fine to go after Trump University, fine to call him a con man, except for the point that you're making about what that says about his supporters, fine to take him on his lack of policy knowledge. But when you start talking about whether he wet his pants, I think you kind of make yourself look a little juvenile there.
The question is whether you can knock off Trump by being a knockoff of Trump. Yeah. And I think if people want incivility, they've got their man.
Let me be the one voice for incivility at the table here. I actually think the only way that you can beat Trump is recognizing that he is a one-man wrecking machine fueled by this cult of personality, so you have to attack him on those bases. None of these ideological positioning issues matter for Trump. It's not something where you can say, one time you said this and now you said this. That doesn't peel off any of his people. The only way that you can do it is by out-alphaing Trump, and I think that's what Rubio's attempting to do.
Go ahead, Jamelle.
I think you're right that the ideological positioning is useless and they shouldn't do it. But talking to Trump voters, I think the things that they attach to, that they like about Trump, is that he seems like he gets them, that he is like them in some fundamental way. And so I think the avenue of attack for Republicans has to be convincing them that is not true. And the Trump University thing is a start. But the con man stuff, I think, works against that.
There's another issue on this con man thing, which is, I heard you interview him. I heard you ask very plainly, would you support him, essentially? And he said, and he danced around the question. He said he's going to destroy the Republican Party. I don't believe he's going to be the nominee. But he never said he wouldn't support him. And so he sounds very much like a politician. And that is the language that aggravates those voters who are going to Donald Trump.
That's right, Peggy. The con men in this political season are the politicians.
Yeah.
That's the default setting for con man, we've learned from the voters.
Yeah. I think the way for Rubio, I agree with what Jamelle says, to look at people, for Rubio to say to Trump supporters, hey, essentially he's conned you, he's a con man, that's what they do, you poor gold people. My goodness, that's not the way to bring him in. How about something more interesting? How about you come forward and say, Trump supporters, I absolutely know what you think about the Republican Party and the Republican establishment and how disappointed you are. Guess what? I'm going to tell you what you're right about, what they've been disappointing about. The Republican Party is always eager to tell you the flaws of the Democratic Party. Take Trump supporters seriously by conceding what is true about their
I think people
critique
have-
of the GOP.
I think that the candidates have been trying to do that all along, and it hasn't been working. And I think that goes
Jeez.
back to your first question about whether Trump is unstoppable at this point. I think the other candidates, have essentially conceded that he is more or less unstoppable in the primaries, that the place to stop him, if he is to be stopped, is at the convention itself. You see both the Rubio campaign and the Cruz campaign and the Kasich campaign all positioning themselves. And I did some canvassing among the Republican establishment this weekend, and in addition to the various stages of grief and resignation, you hear some crazy ideas like, well, it might not be too late for Mitt Romney to file in some of the
my
later
goodness.
primaries.
Oh, my
We're all
goodness.
talking about convention strategies now and not really primary strategies.
Yeah,
Wow.
but Ben, isn't that? I mean, we're getting into the high fantasy theories now, right?
What we're witnessing really is a political realignment, John. I mean, I think we're moving from a traditional understanding of left-right politics that we've had for a long time to something that looks very different. The thing to understand here is that Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, they're not the disease, and they're not the symptom of the disease. They are the beta test of a cure from the perspective of the people. And for those of us who have looked in sort of the established order of the political fray over the course of the past several years, it looks like chaos, but to the people, I think it looks like democracy. And I think that that's something that really is moving us to a new reality where the parties are going to have to retrofit themselves and adapt to this new realignment.
I think that was very smart.
Okay. So a plus one from Ms. Noonan. David, I want to ask you one quick question, though, about this idea of running against Trump. I mean, if you are the Democrats and you're watching this, if you were in the position you used to be in, are you gleeful? Do you think Donald Trump is going to be a great candidate to run against?
I think 4 months ago, Democrats might have been gleeful about running against Donald Trump. I think Democrats are a bit more wary now, just because he's defied expectations throughout, and he is speaking to a sense of anger and anxiety out there that could go to some core of the Democratic base, working class voters, although those working class whites have been drifting away. What he can't do, I don't think, is repair the breach with minority voters, particularly Hispanic voters. I think that wall he's built between himself and Hispanic voters cannot be
pretty high.
breached, and that's going to be a very, very high here.
He keeps adding.
So I think that's a huge problem for him. In a general election with women, I think he will galvanize the Democratic base. So I still think he has a tough road to hoe to win the presidency, but I think he's defied expectations so much that people are a little wary now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of the anger in the electorate is not, I don't think it's universal. If you look at polls of African Americans, of Latinos, of people in I guess the rising American electorate, they say they're actually pretty optimistic about the country's direction, which makes a lot of sense. A generation ago, things were pretty bad. It's among a slice of older white Americans, younger white Americans who I think feel betrayed by spending all this money on college and all of a sudden being in a bad place, that the anger is. And I'm not sure how Trump interacts in a general electorate where you have a lot of Americans, Black, Latino, Asian American, who do not fundamentally feel that same kind of anger. And there are white Americans who are with them on that. And so how this plays, to me, is an unknown.
But I will say this, people say there's an enthusiasm gap, and you see it in the turnouts, and that's true. I think the antidote to the enthusiasm gap for Hillary Clinton, should she be the nominee, is Donald Trump and perhaps the Supreme Court debate. And I think that will galvanize a base that may not be as enthused about her as they were, say, about Barack Obama.
And we saw Hillary Clinton trying to turn that page last night after her big victory in South Carolina.
You saw her trying to do two things at once last night, which I thought she did just fine, which is to still be attentive to the Sanders vote and the arguments that they want to hear from her. And so there was that about big banks and everything else, and to turn her attention to her vision of making America great again, which is making America whole again. I want to go back, though, and say one thing about Donald Trump and the excellent question that you asked him.
Can't stay away from him.
I can't stay away from him about taxes, because his argument is we don't learn anything from tax returns. And that is just not true. Here's what we learn that we don't learn from other filings: your income, what your effective tax rate is. In other words, how much you've used loopholes and deductions and tax shelters, how much you've given to charity, and if you want to give it out, who those charities are for. And I understand tax lawyers don't want people under audit to give out their stuff, but audits end, and you can do two things: give the tax returns for the audits that end, and give the summaries.
Ben,
Case closed.
let me add a question to you, Ben, and then you can say whatever you want. But the question is this. When you talk about that beta testing that the public may be doing, does that mean that there is a different standard or a lower threshold in terms of facts, which is to say Donald Trump has been fact-checked to a fare thee well. Yeah. He says things and he is called on it, and he has said about the voters, they don't care about policy positions, they don't care about these small things because he's speaking to a larger truth. Do you think that's true, or that there could be something that could knock him back?
I think that there is something that happens, a phenomenon that happens around a conspiracy theory, where if you believe in a conspiracy theory, then every critique of that theory is simply more proof that the conspiracy exists. And I think that that's something that goes on in the person of Trump. To Ruth's point about his taxes, a few years ago, Trump was being roasted by Comedy Central. They always have rules about things that you can't joke about. Donald Trump's rule at that time, the only thing that you couldn't joke about was the suggestion that he had less money than he claimed to. Yeah. I think that that suggests quite a good deal about how to get under his skin.
Mm.
Peggy, back to the Democratic race, we saw Hillary Clinton make this pivot. Ruth's point out and there seems to be general agreement that Donald Trump really helps her kind of elevate to her best self. Do you think that's right? Does it make it easier to run against Donald Trump for Hillary Clinton than, say, Marco Rubio if you're a Republican?
I guess two thoughts. One is that Bernie Sanders has, whatever happens in his campaign, he has very much succeeded in pushing Mrs. Clinton to the left in terms of policy. That's a big thing, whatever happens to him. But we'll see how that goes. With Mrs. Clinton and Trump, Trump is sort of known as an outrageous outre figure who gets away with a great deal. But Mrs. Clinton consistently, month after month, is also seen as a person who herself is not trustworthy, does not tell the truth. So we could wind up with these two wholly unusual figures where most of the people in America say, he's outrageous, she's untrustworthy. I wonder, next to a brilliant Democratic thinker, I wonder how Mrs. Clinton turns around a persistent, long-held reputation as dishonest and untrustworthy.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's a hard thing to. You can't stand up and say, I'm trustworthy. You have to go out and navigate around that.
You're not trustworthy.
You can't do it. It's not going to have much impact. Let me say that.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but that is a big question.
No, it isn't. It is. The question is on what standards are people voting and what's important to them, and do they at the end of the day feel that she is the strongest advocate for them on those issues? And in the case of Trump, whether he's a plausible commander-in-chief, a plausible president, because they absolutely believe that she is.
And to go back to a point you made earlier, David, Trump is, not only did Trump in an earlier age rail against the Central Park Five, he was sued by the federal government for housing discrimination. I mean, Trump is a guy who activates a lot of fears among Black and Latino voters that can be, cynically exploited to win.
All right, that's going to have to be the last word. Jamelle, thanks to all of you.